Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday Market Snapshot for the Ottawa Real Estate Market for Monday, July 29th, 2024. My name is Annalee Rice. I'm a realtor here in Ottawa, Ontario, and every week I bring you the details of what's going on in the Ottawa real estate market. This being the last week in July, I've included a bunch of the month-end data and charts. They won't be fully accurate, obviously, because there's still a few days left of the month and sales that get reported in the last couple days. But I'll update them again next week with the full data, but it'll give us a picture of what's happening overall, and we can see how July has stacked up to last year and last month. You'll see that I have the Olympic rings up there at the top there, and I'm enjoying the Olympics. It's always been a thing I enjoy watching, so I hope you're enjoying watching all the sports from the Olympics as well. Okay, back to real estate. Okay, so first off, let's look citywide. We see that the overall number of active listings continues to drop. We just dropped down below 2,800 again after a few weeks above. And we can see that the drop was mostly in the detached, a little bit in condos. Townhomes actually stayed steady. Sales this week actually jumped back up across property types. Okay, so this is our graph form of the inventory, and you can see the overall inventory is the black and the active inventory in the green up at the top there. And we're sort of hovering along at the same thing. Inventory levels are obviously very high. And you can see the horizontal lines, the little dash lines there, shows you back to where we were at the same week last year. And you can see, obviously, there's still quite a gap there. The inventory levels climbed a little bit throughout the later spring last year, but it really started climbing after they had the two Bank of Canada rate hikes last year in June and July. So that's when sort of sales dropped off. You can see in the red line there at the bottom last year, you can see the sales dropped off and the inventory really started to climb. So that was sort of the turning point last year in the market. And then since July last year, our interest rate, the Bank of Canada overnight lending rate had sat at the 5%, and that was definitely the big damper on the market this year. So now here we are a year later, 2024, and the Bank of Canada has now dropped the overnight lending rate in both June and July. And so I think that's why our sales are still sitting fairly strong. They're obviously higher than they were last year, and our inventory levels are still high, but the question is whether or not those two interest rate hikes are going to sort of turn the corner for this year's market, and especially if the Bank of Canada continues to drop any interest rates. The next announcement isn't for another month and a half or so, but if they continue to drop the interest rates, then that's going to bring the confidence back. Keep the sales perhaps high, maybe elevate them a little bit higher in the fall market, and perhaps the inventory will start coming down because properties are selling and not just because sellers are discouraged. Okay, so this graph shows us the new listings. We had 389 properties that were listed this past week. 136 of those were relisted properties and 253 were new to the market properties. The ratios were 35% relisted and 65% new to the market, and those ratios kind of shifted a bit this week. The last little while we've been at sort of 30-70, so this week it was a little bit higher on the relisted properties. And I do expect that this coming week, because we are heading into a long weekend, sort of like the midsummer long weekend, I do expect that the number of new listings this week is definitely going to drop. And potentially just overall, it's just going to be a really low week because people don't want to list right before a long weekend. They also don't want to make those price changes or relisting right before a long weekend. A lot will happen after the long weekend, in the week or two after the long weekend. Okay, so if we look at the sales this week, we had 249 sales in the last 7 days, and 16% of those had no conditions. You can see that's definitely on a downward trend. We're down below that 20%, and 22% were sold at or above asking. And that was a big drop. It was a 10% drop from last week. I think last week was a bit just of an anomaly. We were trending down to that 20-ish percent, 20, 25% instead of up in the 30s. over the last while. For sales within the first 7 days, there's 29 properties sold within the first 7 days on the market. That was 12% of the sales. And for those ones, 41% sold with no conditions and 72% sold at or above asking price. Those percentages were pretty much the same. So for properties that sold within the first 30 days on the market, it was 50% of the sales, which was 124 properties, and 18% of those sold with no conditions, and 34% sold at or above asking price. And those were a bit of a changes. So the 34% was down by 17%. Last week we again had a bit of a jump in the number of properties that had been long on the market but selling at or above asking. Okay, so at or above asking, we had 55 homes that sold at or above asking price this past week. 31 of those, which was 56% of them, sold for asking or up to 1% over asking, so just a very slight amount. 16 of the homes, which was 29%, sold for between 1 and 5% above asking price, and 8 homes, which represented 15%, sold for more than 5% of the asking price. The highest percent over was 12%, and it was the same property, and it had the highest dollar value over, and it was $71,100 over asking. It was a 3-bed semi in Old Ottawa South. It was listed for $589,900, and it sold for $661,000. And funny enough, there was actually, out of those 8 homes that had sold for more than 5% over, 2 of them were from the same street, and it's not really a street that I've seen that many houses sell for, so it must be a popular street. And people were like happy to see houses come on. It was in Old Ottawa South, great location, close to the river and the canal, and walking distance to Lansdowne and such. Now, there was a property that was listed, and it had it was a townhouse in Canada. So I have that little asterisk at the bottom there, because there was one that showed that it was 44% over asking, but it was like a townhome that was not updated and nothing special. And it had been on for over a month. And then all of a sudden the sale price was listed that it had sold for $300,000 above the asking price. So I think that was a typo. Sometimes there are data entry errors, and they if they get put in right at the end of the week, or like on Friday, Saturday kind of time frame, they don't get corrected until the next week. And because the member can't change that, it has to be done at a higher level. So I think that's what happened there. There's absolutely zero chance that an older townhome in Canada sold for 900 and something thousand. So I deleted that one, corrected it, just pulled it down to 600, and so that one did not count. Okay, and next let's zoom in to see what happened in the different areas of the city. In the central urban region, which is inside the Greenbelt, the active inventory dropped across property types, and you can see that the sales were up just slightly for detached, a fair bit for condos, and then just down slightly for townhomes. Canada and Stittsville is a bit of a mixed bag. You got a slight increase for detached and towns, a little bit more for towns. I'll look at how many towns are for sale in Canada and Stittsville. It's quite a lot. And a slight decrease for the number of active listings for condos in Canada and Stittsville. Sales were down slightly for detached and condos, quite slow for condos there. And townhomes saw a jump, and a fair good number of townhomes selling this week. Okay, in Barrhaven and Riverside South, we still have quite a number of properties listed there. Detached went up slightly, townhomes down slightly, and condos just down by 1. Sales were slow for detached. Only 3 detached homes sold this week. And then towns was up a little bit there, and condos down just by 1. And finally in Orleans, we have a drop in inventory across property types, a slight drop in detached, towns, and condos. And in contrast to Barrhaven and Riverside South, Orleans saw 27 sales of detached homes this past week, which was a huge jump, obviously, from past weeks. They had an increase in towns that sold this week and a decrease from condos, although 8 condos is still quite high for Orleans. Here I've got the full data for the residential detached homes, and you can see that the sales this week were higher than the conditional sales. So I do expect next week will drop, especially since we're heading into a long weekend. I think it's going to be a slow week next week for sales. And I will comment that the active days on market, CDOM there, was climbing pretty much for all property types. It was increasing by about 3. This is for townhomes. You can see that the days on market is obviously lower than the detached or the condos when we get to the next slide there. But again, you've got fewer conditionally sold properties than you do sales this past week. So again, it's probably going to slow down fairly significantly next week. And for condos, it's actually sort of the opposite. You've got more conditionally sold than sold. I don't think that particularly means that you're going to have more sales this coming week. It's possible. But condos just tend to have more common having conditional periods, and it's a bit slower of a market. Okay, so in this chart, we have the month-to-month average sale price. So comparing June 2024 to July 2024, these data points were taken on July 28th. So clearly it is not the full average. There's still about 4 or 5 days worth of sales probably to be reported there. They will be adjusted. I will update them next week. I don't know why I was a little bit pessimistic coming in. I was thinking that the average sale prices were going to start seeing a bit of drops just because July tends to be a bit of a slowdown. Prices do tend to drop in July and August. And then also just because we have such high levels of inventory. So I was expecting a bit of a drop, but the data showed differently, and we actually had a bit of an increase in the detached average sale price there, up by 2.5% June to July. Semis and freeholds were slightly down, as were condo apartments, and the condo row townhomes did see a bit of an increase there, 5%, but they are a lot more volatile depending on what is selling. Okay, so these charts show you the close price to the original list price ratio. So it sort of shows you how close to the asking price properties are selling. You can see that for detached and towns, they both dropped this month, which does sort of correlate with the slower market, higher inventory. People don't have to offer as close to asking price. And it also, if you remember back when we were talking about properties going at or above asking, those ratios have been coming down. There's been fewer homes selling for higher above the asking price. So that's going to pull down this average as we go along. And these charts show us the average days to sell. So these are the properties that are actually selling. You can see that they did climb. Again, these are all going to be updated at next week with the full end month. They are going to adjust slightly. But you do see that the houses are taking longer. Through July, they took longer to sell than they had throughout the spring months. And this is the monthly sales for the last 10 years, all property types added together. And you can see that it almost is on top of that blue line there, but we are just a few higher than we were last July. So again, with 3-4 days left to count for August, I do expect that our number of overall sales this July will definitely have outpaced what we had in July 2023. It's not unexpected, as we discussed on that other slide, was the fact that in June and July last year, the Bank of Canada had raised the interest rates, kind of stifling the market. And you can see that the number of sales dropped off. They always drop off in this summer and into the fall, but it really did put a damper on last year's sales. And so this year, perhaps there's a bit of a rally just because the interest rates are coming down, but also there's people that just need to buy and sell. And the final charts here are the months of inventory. That is sort of a ratio between the number of properties on the market and then the number of sales in that month. So as we know, the inventory levels are very high. They have been elevated all spring and even throughout the summer. They are June and into the beginning of July there. That was pretty much the peak inventory, and sales definitely drop off in July versus June. So we can see that the months of inventory actually climbs fairly significantly. These will again be updated. Those bars will come down as we get the full data for July being counted, but they are going to be elevated compared to June months of inventory. And the months of inventory, just if you need a recap, is how many months it would take to sell all of the current inventory if no other properties came on the market and the sales continued at the pace that they are at. So of course, that's a snapshot in time. Neither of those things stay true. The inventory does continue to fluctuate with new listings and sales, obviously, but the sales volume does not stay the same. It obviously changes month to month. And that finishes up my update for July 29th. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment in the YouTube notes or just get in touch. My details are there. And I hope you're having a fantastic summer, and I'll see you next week and next month.